Thank you all for coming. Yes, today I will be talking about the history of video game console hacking. So a little bit about who I am and why I'm qualified to talk about this. So I am about to be in my third year of my PhD as part of the Cyber AI Hub in CSIT, which is down in the Titanic Quarter for Queen's University, Belfast. To summarise my research quickly, it is teaching AI to protect planes. If you think that sounds more interesting than this talk, you can leave now and find it on YouTube from last year. And there'll be links to that at the end. And as you've noticed, I'm a student, so that makes me very qualified to talk about video games because I have lots of time to play them still. And to save somebody in the audience from asking at the end, my favourite video game is XCOM 2. So to show what I'll be talking about today, or more importantly what I won't be talking about, sadly BSides doesn't offer like a 5-hour slot for me to talk about every video game console, and I won't be able to talk about handhelds either. PC gaming is its own thing entirely. And I won't touch on the ethics or legality of this. If you consult, if you do this to your own stuff, I would be very hesitant to put it online. The big companies will find you. Even if you're not doing anything tech related, I'd be very careful. They're very protective. There was a local pizza place near me called Mario's, and it had a mustached mascot, and it's been renamed. So I think potentially somebody could have intervened there. So if you definitely muck with their products themselves, that they're going to come after you. There's some great stories. I don't necessarily have them in here, but there's one who hacked the original Xbox, and he recorded, thankfully, the voicemail that he got from Xbox coming on to give him a cease and desist, and take down the information he put online. And it's quite just humorous to listen to this poor guy in the office who clearly pulled the short straw, and it was like, you have to ring him and tell him to take it down. So, speaking a little bit about the console generations first, to go over their history, we start off in the sort of 70s with the Magnavox Odyssey, which was a console I hadn't heard of until I researched for this talk. One of the key things at this stage is they really had no idea what a controller was supposed to look like. As you'll see, they just straight up put number pads or strange rotating dials and things. But very weird. I'm glad that we got over that. Moving on a bit, you'll see that some of these are pre and post collapse. That's really just talking about the American-centered sort of view of it, and the rest of the world was pretty unaffected, especially Japan, which really capitalized on this sort of period where they sort of brought in the NES and started to sort of do really well, and they're still around today. The same can't be said about Sega, who are, I think, barely able to survive at the moment. Moving on to Generation 5 and 6, the most sort of arguably important era for video game development because of optical media. It made it far easier for developers to put their code onto a disk and then load it into a test copy compared to having to build a new cartridge every time they wanted to test it on hardware. It was pretty important. Generation 7 is sort of what I would call the Goldilocks generation for console hacking. I think the main sort of reason why is they started to look sort of more like computers at this stage. They're computers at every stage, but they started to have internal storage and be able to run apps and things on them. You had the Wii channels. You could view the weather if you got bored of playing Mario Kart or something. And I'll focus a lot on these later on. And then we have the modern era, which is just a bit boring, to be honest. And it's sort of cloud-focused. Ironically, they're now starting to remove the optical drives, which was, something they famously added a while ago. So to get on to the history of the hacking, when did it all start? I think you can argue about this quite a bit. One of the cases you can make was like one of the first video games ever was sort of a hack in itself. A PhD student who had a really cool name. Sadly, we don't all get those. He decided to basically modify a giant and very expensive looking calculator and got it to run XEOZs, tic-tac-toe, noughts and crosses, whatever you want to call it. But this is sort of, this is like modifying a computer to run a game. It's not really hacking like a games console. So you can move further on to products that were made to play games, like the arcade, and this is where sort of understandably people wanted to start to modify them because you got charged every time you wanted to play it. And that's sort of like weirdly come back in the form of mobile gaming. So we then move on to things like cheating devices. So whenever like the household gaming market came around, some of the first stuff was like devices like the Action Replay that added features like saving your game or pausing it that weren't available in every video game at the time. And a lot of these companies, like especially Action Replay, continued on for years. This was actually a cartridge that I bought in a retail store when I was a child, and I was like, that seems wild that I was able to get a thing that basically just hacked a DS. As a child, I was able to buy that. I was like, that seems strange to me. I don't think they're around anymore, but who knows? So I think really the 90s was when it all kicked off. This was sort of the era when piracy sort of became quite rampant. And this is an example of like one of the first ways to copy or sort of crack video games. This is for the Atari 2600. If you wanted to like basically play a game, you had to copy it onto a whole new microprocessor and just have a whole load of these kicking around and use like a weird converter to plug it in. So this was also the advent of when bootlegs also became a thing. And that's basically companies making sort of unlicensed games. A lot of the time they're fairly like copyright infringing as well. So what did the games industry learn? Well, we should probably protect like this our digital media and devices, and that's sort of where the term DRM came from. So moving on to like when it got popular, as I mentioned previously, the optical media and the optical drive were massive for development, and they were also massive for people trying to copy software because home like DVD writers were very prevalent at this time. So it made it quite easy for someone to take a real disc and then just rip it onto a copy, and then you have two of the same thing for the price of one. So Sony were like, right, we can't let that happen. So what did they do? Well, the reason it's copyable in the first place is they didn't bother to obscure any of the data on the disk, which is a bit stupid, but they thought of an even better way to protect it, the wobble groove. So what they did was put a really weird line at the start of the disk reading process, and if it didn't find this, it would be like, this is a fake, don't run that on the PlayStation. So this wasn't a sort of shape that could easily be replicated by home copying machines for a while. So how did hackers get around this? Well, they only put the check at the beginning of the disk. So what you could do was put a real one in and then quickly open the lid, take it out, put your fake one in, and it would have just done the check and said, yeah, the thing that you're about to read is real, and then read the copy. So you didn't really need to do any hacking. You just needed to have good sort of hand-eye coordination. So what did the games industry learn? Maybe we should put protection on all of the disk and not just the first 3 seconds. So onto the PlayStation 2, sticking with Sony here. They put product code throughout the disk, which acted as one part of the encryption. The other part was an unburnable watermark logo. This is an even harder to replicate wobble groove, basically, for those familiar with that concept. This basically ended up with a disk security that, for argument's sake, can't be broken. So what did hackers do to get around this? Well, they went after the thing that reads the disk, and that's the mechacon, or the mechanical controller, which doesn't sound as cool. Well, what does the mechacon do? So it checks the format of the media that you put into your PlayStation 2, and it says this should be DVD-ROM, which is read-only memory. So it shouldn't have been a copy. A copy would require to be a piece of memory that is writable, or DVD-R. So it said, only allow DVD-ROMs. So how did they get around this? Well, someone came up with the Messiah mod chip that required you to take 20 wires and solder this chip on top of your PlayStation 2. And why this chip needs 20 wires, the way it works is you can't just skip this check, you have to pass it. So what it does is add the DVD-R format to the list of whitelisted media formats. So that's why it's quite complicated, requiring a lot of wires. So what did the games industry learn from this? Well, we should probably also check the integrity of the component hardware that's running the media. So I'm going to move into the aforementioned Goldilocks generation, starting this time with Microsoft rather than Sony, with the Xbox 360. Once again, disk security that couldn't be reasonably broken. Looking more at the console security, the components were encrypted with unique per-device keys. So each one of these disk drive and things had its own signed code, and if it didn't match, it would say, okay, your disk drive's been modified, we're not going to allow it to run. And the way it did this was using a hypervisor to sort of protect the core operating system. So because these keys are communicated between the different devices, they can be sniffed. You can get your hands on them, and that basically allows you to sign your own code and then modify the firmware of the disk drive to say, right, don't do any of those checks to make sure that my disk isn't a fake. The way it did this is you would write onto the disk drive flash memory, and it was fairly easy to do because the memory was separate. So you could get it the serial peripheral interface, which was required to write onto it. So what did the games industry learn? We should probably disable write privileges on our firmware storage and protect it. So Xbox actually got a bit lucky here. They had a chance to try again with the 360 because of the red ring of death. So when the Slim came along, they thought, right, you want access to this memory. What we're going to do is actually put it inside the controller to thwart all of you, so you can't write to it anymore. And we're going to stack them on top of each other and put them inside of the same piece of plastic. So you can see here this diagram points out this is the serial peripheral interface, and it's basically getting tied to another wire that'll set it high. So it means it's always on read-only mode. So the only way that we would be able to effectively write in the same way that we previously did was to cut this wire in some way, but it's encased inside of a component. So that's not really possible. As we see, it's sort of within this chip, this MediaTek chip. But some people, once they decapped it, which became how they got photos like this from the inside, they basically drew a diagram and said, if you line all of these pins up, you can sort of know where it is inside the chip. What if we just drill into the chip from above and cut the wire? So this is the kamikaze hack, and this was I love this so much when I first saw it. That's why I did this talk. So Yes, you would basically drill in using a vague idea of some lines. And as we said, there's two wires there, one on top of the other. You only need the top one. If you wreck the bottom one, whole Xbox broken. So it's not just I'm drilling here, it's you need to just drill a bit. Yeah, quite difficult. But they thought, right, okay, if they can get the right privileges, what we should maybe do instead is protect those keys so that they can't just write their own firmware. So we move on to the Wii. Did they take all the previous information into mind about disk drive security? No. They actually used the same disk drive as the GameCube, which had been out for ages, so it was very exploitable already. So running your own games on the Wii was actually quite easy, like copied games. But for the sake of keeping this talk interesting, I thought, what if we raised the bar from running our own games to running our own software on the Wii, for its to make use of its amazing computing power. This is typically known as homebrew within the sort of gaming community. I think maybe just software community in general. So if we want to write our own homebrew, what do we need to get past in the ways of security? So we need a way to get the keys, and we need a way to write similar to the Xbox. So this was a pretty difficult task, and the Wii, was pretty sensibly built to a degree, and said, right, the memory, instead of having keys for all the components, we're going to keep the keys in the main memory, and we're going to say nothing has access to this memory whatsoever. So the minute it leaves, it's written in the factory, and that chip is sealed up, sent away. No one can ever get to it ever again. Which it's quite a good idea. So, as I said about the disk drive they included earlier, the reason they did this is because they included a GameCube mode where you could basically run GameCube games on your Wii backwards compatibility. So, what this actually did was essentially boot into a version of the GameCube operating system. And as I previously said, the GameCube had been out for a while. It was very known, exploitable. Did they bother to maybe update any of that stuff? No. So any, vulnerable custom code that you had for the original GameCube, you could exploit it here. Sensibly, the Wii restricts the memory so that even if you do those exploits, you can't escape the part of the memory allocated to the GameCube. So you'll see on this diagram here is the Wii's memory, and you can see there's a key there. And when you activate GameCube mode, this happens. And the GameCube is confined to that part of the memory, and the keys aren't there. Nintendo thought this over. So what if we moved the GameCube memory? This is in theory, software-wise, impossible. And if we did move it, we could get those keys that we need to write our own software. So Team Tweezers, spelt with Wii in the name, realized you could just slide the memory address that the GameCube mode could use using a pair of tweezers up, and were able to grab the keys. That's not the end of the story, though. We have a bit of signed firmware that will run, but we now need a way to write it because the Wii's memory is still protected. So we can't write it while we're in GameCube mode because that'll only write to the GameCube memory. And when we go back to the Wii mode, that'll get written over. So we need a way to write in Wii mode. So Team Tweezers came back, double bill, real menace for Nintendo. They came back with the Twilight hack. To capitalize on their previous exploit. How does this work? So really, really long horse name. So within the game, you name your horse, which is normally, I think, a Epona, and you give it a ridiculously long name. And what this does is causes a buffer overflow, and basically you can point to the SD card memory addresses, and it'll run that code instead. And you put your homebrew that you've signed with your keys on there, and then it runs. So what did the games industry learn here? We should probably assess security of legacy modes if we intend to include them. So going back to Sony, we started there and we'll end there. this one's the most sort of complicated I'll go through. But when the PlayStation 3 came out, it was the most like a computer that a game console had ever seen. You could actually, when it first released, run other operating systems on the PlayStation, supported sort of natively by Sony, and they advertised it as like you could utilize the computing power of the Cell processor, which I was told was really heavily marketed at the time, as like a new amazing thing, but I don't think it caught on. It didn't catch on too much, but unfortunately for Sony, because they sold their consoles at a loss, people did realize, oh, we can get a really good deal and sort of just put a whole load of these together and make a really powerful computer on the cheap. And that's exactly what the US Air Force did when they combined nearly 2,000 PlayStation 3s into a giant supercomputer. And there was all these other wild cases of people proposing like preposterous numbers of PlayStation 3s hooked up. I can only imagine if they did this nowadays, like people are already annoyed at scalpers. Imagine being like, didn't get a PlayStation 6, I'm raging, and the US Air Force comes along, it's like, we've got 3,000 PlayStation 6s and you're getting none of them, and we're going to build a new computer out of it. You'd be very annoyed. So one guy online basically theoretically came up with a way to break into the PlayStation mode from the Linux or other operating system mode, and his proposal online that he never even did was so terrifying that Sony just removed the whole feature. And this cost them like millions in lawsuits because this was advertised as a thing that you'd be able to do, and they basically had to remove it from all the PlayStations. This was, to be fair, a pretty good idea from Sony's part. I don't know if it was monetarily, but from a hacking standpoint, it was quite a good idea. It took 4 years to break the PlayStation 3 security. That's a really long time for console security. Most of the other ones, it's either like weeks or months until they get broken. So the USB was its eventual downfall, though. A team came along that named themselves PS Jailbreak and created this magical USB stick that you plugged in, and then you also plugged in an external hard drive, and boom, you could play all your games that you put onto the hard drive that you obtained somehow and got them on there. But they charged £100 for this, and this was like back in 2010, so that's like probably like £250 nowadays. So yeah, the hackers really didn't like this. There's kind of an honor like system of, if you break it, you need to tell everybody how you broke it and sort of make that publicly available. So this actually caused infighting, and the hackers basically bought this product, reverse engineered it, and figured out how to hack it themselves without having to everybody to pay this other company. So how did the PS jailbreak work? Well, it used a number of things. It posed as a 6-port USB hub and did funny things with this. It utilized heap overflow exploits, and also basically the big one was faking credentials as the debug jig. Eventually, people figured out if you named your USB device the correct name that was like PlayStation Debug 1, 2, 3 or something, they just tried a whole load of these. It would then put it into debug mode as long as your USB device was just named the correct thing. So what did the games industry learn? Maybe make your debugging mode harder to access. But I'll actually explore. I've done the wee takeaway already, but I'm going to explain this in more detail, but it's quite complicated. So I'm going to need, I know it's near the end of the talk. You're getting tired, but I need you to perk up a wee bit and, lock in for this. So on the top, we have, this is the same 6-port USB hub, top and bottom. The top is what the PlayStation can see, and the bottom is sort of what the PS jailbreak or the exploiter knows is going on behind the scenes. So step 1, we're going to insert the payload into the first port, and this payload basically points the memory address for the disk drive instead to your external hard drive, so it'll run games from the hard drive as if it was a disk. It's quite clever. So that goes in there. But the PlayStation won't like natively run that when you just plug it in. So we insert another drive into 2. Doesn't really matter what this is. You'll see why later. Into 3, we then basically place a really big USB drive, and the PlayStation thinks that it's just filling 3, but it's so large that it actually heap overflows and fills 3 and 4. We're then going to unplug that device number 2. Now this is important because basically when the memory is full, if you're trying to write to it, it'll default to placing it in the nearest or first available location instead. And that for us would be 2 now that it's freed up. So we insert the shellcode into 4, and this shellcode will activate the payload. But because 4 is actually full, this gets shifted down to position 2. And the PlayStation doesn't think it's there. So we then insert another heap exploit, and we also name this one the debug jig, and put it into 5. It's actually 5 and 6, but they're now full. So the debug mode points to port 2, which actually has the shellcode in it. So this runs the shellcode, which then detonates the payload, and you can now play all your games off of that hard drive. So to close the modern era, it's become much more software focused. As you can see, even as we go on, it becomes more of a software challenge than a hardware one. And the sort of big problem with this is a lot of these modern consoles, you have to be on the latest update to have connectivity to play online games. So it's a thing of like you might hack the console, but it won't stay hacked for long because eventually it'll get patched, or you'll get banned or something like that. It's I don't know if it's as popular. I can't really say. Do we still hack the old systems though to sort of gain more power and things over them? I don't know for sure. If I'm sure people still do. I've got some people attached to the end who go back and modify things, but I think now a lot of people choose to use emulation instead, and it's a whole other like legal can of worms that I won't get into. So to give some takeaways from the PlayStation 1 era, we learned protect your media. Don't rely on silly gimmicks like the wobble groove. PlayStation 2, let's start checking the integrity of our firmware or our different controllers on our device. The Xbox 360, protect your keys for your encryption and preferably make them drill proof. The Wii, assess legacy of or assess security of legacy modes. If you're going to include something that's backwards compatible, make sure that it's now safe to do so. If it was vulnerable at the time. The PlayStation 3, make your debugging mode harder to access, and there's probably some other, port-related things that you could learn about that case. Arguably, the last 2 are the most important, and the first of which is all of this advice is probably horribly out of date. It's weird to say that the PlayStation 3 is about 15 years old or closing in on that, which is terrifying because I feel like it came out yesterday. And lastly, gamers, I suppose hackers as well, they will find a way. So that's one thing that they'll always get around your security. Thank you very much, and I'll take some questions. There's my socials and some sources as well to check out if you want to find out more. Questions? One here. Oh, we've got 2 here. Yeah, so so it's sort of saying like the Xbox, it has an, it's not, as I say, the security isn't on it. It's not a great story behind it, but, or well, sorry, it's not amazing. The story behind it definitely is good. If there's one of them I can recommend, going and watching a video about, it's the Xbox one. It's the one that the voicemail is included. Because yeah, he basically was a researcher and put all the stuff online. I think he's got a book and everything that's free if you want to read how he did it. But yeah, it's an interesting story at least. But yeah, the security wasn't amazing on it either. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So a lot of people got fed up having to have quick hands. So there was mod chips that would do that for you, and I said some of it was maybe obscuring sensors or things, that were preventing that. I know on the GameCube they put a whole load of sensor. I think there was three they put in. So whenever the lid of the GameCube came up, it was like, ah, you're trying to lift the disc out, aren't you? Halfway through, we've caught you. So yeah, they had to. Sometimes there was different versions of the PlayStation's all maybe included sensors to try and stop people doing swap tricks and things. Okay, I'm gonna this question. Did you have a question as well now? Yeah, I'll grab this one first and then I'll come back. There you go. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, there you go. The mod chip just input the wobble signal regardless of the disk. And question here. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah. Um. Yeah, as I said, Nintendo's not the one to muck with. There's the questions about like, have you seen the latest stuff with Switch 2? I said I don't follow this too closely, and I've not tried any of it myself. But yeah, I've seen weird things happening to it where it like thinks someone's exploiting it, and it's just bricked the console, and weird things happening. I think there was a lot that ended up being even like bricked on arrival because of maybe something happened with like the battery activating stuff. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, but I mean, it's a pretty good security strategy. If you don't want somebody hacking your product, you just make sure it's bricked on arrival, and then Any other questions? Oh, we've got two more. Two more. I'll take the one in the front. I do think you're on something. I did hear something about the different color. I think potentially the reasons that some of them got like platinum editions might have been to give them better disk security. So there was Spyro's a really good case of it's very interesting to look into. It was a trilogy of games on the PlayStation 1. And basically, every game, the Spyro crew got better and better at putting DRM in their own product, so it didn't want to rely on the wobble groove and stuff. And there's really good cases of, I think, in Spyro 3, they basically implemented like if they detected you tampered with the disc or anything or the console, it would basically like just take your coins off of you constantly. So you could play like the first hour of the game, and then it would be like money bags or something. I don't know who he is. Guy with big money bags would just come and rob you. So it was like you needed 100 gems, and he'd be like, "Thanks," and just take your gems off you, and you could never get onto like the second level. And yeah, it would like wherever the check came in, it would just like ruin someone's like they'd already invested enough time that you would get annoyed that it's then caught you later on. There's some weird. I think PC games as well at the time tried to add stuff like that where they would try and catch people. But yeah, I think it's maybe just those different colors, like different releases, but potentially. Um, and the question behind. So the question's saying, do I think the games industry is really good at security? And is there? I think I would actually say I think they're doing quite well. This is it's a pretty unqualified opinion, but I think the money that they put into it is it's surprisingly one of like they invest a lot in the security. It wouldn't be something I would necessarily think of as like who's putting a lot of money into cybersecurity, but yeah, games industry is as we've seen they've definitely tried to do a lot there. But I don't think they would be the best, but they seem very like as you say the customers or the people wanting to do it are determined, but I think like there's a lot of money in the games industry, so those companies are very financially motivated as well to stop it. So yeah, it's um, just we'll take the last one at the back there. Mm. I So the question's about, do I think there's more scrutiny if a game can cause exploits or host exploits? I don't have much evidence other than I know that I think it's like one of the brain training games on one of the Nintendo products is like the easiest way to hack it, and it is the best selling game on the eShop. So I if that says anything, like I don't think I think it's one of those things of like if it's old enough, they maybe make a judgment call and go, right, are we really gonna profit still? Like we aren't producing the cartridges anymore. The sales on the eShop have completely like maybe dried out or whatever. Like, is it worth us chasing these things up, or are they actually going to make more money by whatever maybe 10% cut they're taking of every person who buys the game to then exploit it? That might actually make them more money. I have no idea, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. But I feel like they would have a lot of scrutiny if there was anything causing like security breaches on maybe like more modern stuff. But for sure, if there was like, they would definitely have that game pulled. I feel like from the stores. Thanks.